And I want to welcome you to our BPM-CON expert breakout sessions, and this is the session for Micropact, and we're really glad to have with us again Bob Ragsdale, Vice President of Marketing. Bob, welcome back to BPM-CON.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
As many of you may know, Micropact is the developer of IntelliTrack, a unified platform for dynamic case management in BPM. Bob is one of the brains behind the scenes there. He helps ensure Micropact data-first platform meets customer needs. He brings 20 years experience to helping organizations devise and deliver best practices and results-driven solutions. And prior to Micropact, he spent quite a number of years in mobility. He was an executive at Perpecio. In his session this morning, Boosting Agility and Adoption, a data-first approach, Bob will share with us the dynamic changing landscape of BPM and case management, where agility and business impact are both driving the need for smarter and innovative apps, not simply workflows. He'll also share how Micropact Data First is delivering quick and lasting assistance to organization and helping them accelerate prototyping, improve agility, and even enhance user engagement. And just a quick reminder before I hand it to Bob, you'll see that you can download a copy of Bob's slides. If you haven't done so, they're available right now under the viewing window. And you'll see there are some other great resources that Bob and his team have put together for us. They're available right now, no extra registration required. And to connect with Bob, we'd love that too. Just type into the submit a question box. And now, Bob, let me hand it back to you and tell us about Boosting Agility and Adoption, a data-first approach.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me here today, Vance. So Boosting Agility and Adoption, a data-first approach. This is something that is near and dear to my heart, the whole data-first concept and how that can impact a business. And so today's session, quite simply, we're going to go through what Data First can do for you, how it can accelerate the entire prototyping process, how it can improve overall agility of your teams and your development efforts, and how it can then dovetail into driving user engagement and system adoption. And system adoption is really the key here because many BPM systems fail not because they're not well-built systems, just because they don't actually have great user adoption in the end. So, we have to drive to that end point, make sure we have wonderful user adoption. So, sort of our agenda today, I'm going to take you through our journey, Micropact's journey, to where we are with the rapid application development and how we came about the data-first methodology. We're going to talk about the benefits of putting data before process, how that enhances participation, as I noted, and then how that then accelerates outcomes and drives adoption. Pretty simple stuff today. So let's take a little bit of history and our journey. Micropact actually began business in 1997 as a services company. We were an IT services company, and we were helping primarily federal agencies. And in early 2000s, we got a large contract with a large federal agency to build a case management system. And it was for a specific type of case, equal opportunity employment, or EEO case. And the particular system had to spit out a report at the end of the year called the 462 report. And we learned that this agency had to submit this report to Congress. In fact, every agency had to submit that report to Congress. So we packaged that solution up into a product, which we called iComplaints in 2002. And today that product now processes 90% of all federal equal opportunity employment claims. And it's a great product. And a lot of people would come to us and they say, can you build me something to process a workers' compensation claim or a background investigation or something else? And so rather than build all those products, we tried to figure out a way to accomplish that goal. I mean, initially we started trying to build all of those. And our success in being able to sell into those customers was through a rapid prototyping approach. But what we found is that we were encountering these repeatable business patterns, right? We would do some data modeling. We would be doing information tracking. There would always be forms and interfaces. There would always be the need for searching all that data that you had, security, policies, and rules. And so we found that, this was really a series of components that we were always rebuilding. And in essence, we were taking some data object, we were taking it through a workflow or a series of workflows or some part of a flow of some type and generating some sort of outcome on the other end. But of course, this is business. Not everything follows a lovely happy path, a beautiful BPM path. So what we found was that no matter what we did, prototyping always started with data modeling. It almost never started with process modeling. And from our buyers, we heard, put data first. right? They would tell us, it doesn't matter what the process is, I have to have accurate data going into the system to ensure that we're making the right decisions on the back end. So data from our buyer's perspective was also preeminent. And so at this point, we're really talking more about case management than we are business process management. So when we're architecting case management systems, we always start with a data-first approach. And what we found in working with our customers is that the data-first approach was more understandable to the users because it was dealing with the inputs and outputs that people dealt with on a daily basis, right? And because we were doing that, we're just using the normal business information, the reports that somebody reads or the forms that they fill out. You can involve everybody from the end users, the knowledge workers, to IT. Nobody really needs any special training to give you the inputs, right? So it's a much more inclusive process. So we can involve a lot more people. And because we could do that then, it was a much more rapid process. Data modeling started immediately because people would start telling you what they needed to see, as opposed to process modeling where you might need some experts, and extracting the process from people could be quite difficult and challenging sometimes, right? The other thing is, as we're doing this and we're modeling data, minimum viable happens earlier in the process. So we were deploying earlier these minimum viable systems that people could then say, oh, I like that. This is working. Now we've got a few bugs over here. Let's fix this or whatever. So you were able to deploy earlier. And because you had involved so many people in the process, you now had a wider audience that had a stake in the system's success. So you have greater adoption in the end because people have bought into the process. And so what we did is we packaged all of that up the way we do that into our current flagship product, IntelliTrack, in 2006. And now, between iComplaints and IntelliTrack, we serve 97% of all federal agencies, a lot of state and local, a lot of commercial agencies. But IntelliTrack is a platform for rapid application development, for case management primarily, and BPM systems to a lesser extent. A good example of this comes from Gartner's IT Expo 2013. I was on the floor. I took a break, went over to the snack table, and they had these big, large cookies. And at the snack table, I met this fellow, Anthony Rogovine, who's the Senior Manager of Application Services in the Faculty of Medicine's IT department at the University of British Columbia. And we struck up a conversation. I was just asking him what he was trying to accomplish at the conference. And he explained to me that he's from UBC. They're the fourth largest medical school in North America. And a medical school is quite a complicated operation, right? Because it's a hospital on the one hand, and it's also an educational institution on the other. So you've got these sort of competing needs. And when it comes to software, there's really nothing out there that sort of bridges the gap, right? And he was telling me how he had this resident onboarding process challenge. So he had an area that he had to cover. British Columbia is 1.5 times the size of Texas. He had to cover that entire area because they have hospitals throughout the entire area. His mandate, in fact, his whole organization's mandate, was to increase production of physicians to actually graduate more certified doctors on the backside of the process, right? And he had to do this over 100 distributed sites. So they have all these hospitals and clinics, and a resident comes into the system and they rotate through these different clinics, and their curriculum technically comes in the door in the form of a patient. And so he's trying to track all this stuff, and he's explaining it to me, and he's explaining that he has these 3 systems that he's looking at, this teacher tracking and payment system, because you have adjunct teachers, and you have physician teachers, and then you have this clinical placement and management and the resident management. And honestly, I didn't really understand what he was telling me. I said, I think I can solve your problem. I think, but I'm not sure. So why don't you come over to our booth and I'll show you my product and we'll see if we might be able to solve that for you. And so he came over, and what we found is, because he started by talking about the process, and it was tough for me to understand, but once we started talking about the information that he needed to capture and manage, then I was able to understand. And as he was talking about the information, we were able to, in real time, begin modeling the system for him so he could see from our side what it would do for him, right? And so there, around the data, again, we were able to begin that dialogue. And around the data then, when he went back to the University of British Columbia, he began a dialogue with his team around the data. He started to talk about, okay, well, let's start doing rapid prototyping around that, approach it that way. And that data first approach then for him and his team facilitated an agile development initiative, or almost DevOps, because he was involving a lot of operations people in it, with people who had no experience with agile. So again, in this example, going to the data really moves things forward. So we like to put the data before the process. For us, it's really a communication vehicle. There are a lot of projects where we start with process, but more often than not, we start with data, because process is tough. It can be confusing, and if you're not an expert in it, it can be a real challenge, because this is hard to conceptualize. The whole swim lane, everything going on and stuff, most people don't get it, and it's just not how we think. It's not how I think. When it comes to the weekend, I don't think about things and say like, okay, this morning I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to go out the driveway, I'm going to turn left, I'm going to head down to the hardware store. From there, I'm going to turn around and come back up. I'm going to go over to the grocery store. I don't think about the process. Where I start is I start with the data. I think about my shopping list. I need milk and peanut butter and cream. I have to pick up some cement and lumber and hinges, all those sorts of things. That then leads me to the process. Oh, well, the grocery store is closest, and I'm going to go to, but everything will get hot, so why don't I go to the lumber store first, et cetera. So we as normal human beings think about data first, because data is tangible. Even when it's unstructured data, right, in the form of a case and documents that you're scanning or emails that you're putting into a system, it's still very tangible, and a normal person can deal with it and give you information. And even when you take it as far as process, if you're dealing with case management, cases are really about states and goals and milestones, right? And people can identify those quite easily because they're data points, right? I have an initiation state, I have an information gathering state, I have a review state, and I have a ruling state, right? So it's data, so it's a little bit easier to engage with people, and it's ideal for those case management scenarios, because case management is information intensive. We're dealing with structured and unstructured data. I might have scans, I might have x-rays, I might have video depositions. I need to collaborate with a lot of people, and based on whatever findings, I might have to change my process. So this approach to it is really great for the case management aspects, the little bit looser aspects. If you start with data, it'll facilitate that and make your life a little bit easier. In the case of UBC, data is at the center of everything. We started with them with a resident management system because we finally established that really the crux of it, everything rotates around that individual who's going to become a physician. And so that deals with their identification number, their student number, where they live, all those sorts of things. And then every other system that is built around that. And so the system of record really for us then became the resident management system. And then the teacher tracking and payment and the other systems are systems then that patch into that central system. But again, it starts with that core data. So now we're going to use that data then to engage our users and get them in this very participatory environment. This is the University of British Columbia team that has been heralding these three systems through the process. And in this picture, there's only one IT individual. Everybody else is a system user, a system manager, or somebody who has influence on the system. And they are not trained in Agile. But by taking this data-first approach, they became very familiar with Agile. When we talk to this subject with our customers, we say, look, just involve everyone you can. To the extent that you can, you really need to involve all your audiences. Not every person necessarily, but all your audiences should have input. Your frontline supervisors, right? How is it going to support them on a day-to-day basis? What do they capture? Your supervisors, your management, and certainly IT. And governance really comes into the IT role because you can build a system and give your users a lot of control over that system and allow them to extend it or change it. Or you can say, no, that's something I don't want the users to do. I want IT to do. But all that information is just data points. And so by leaning on the data and looking at it that way, it generates a lot of engagement, and you want to start very early in the process. I recommend that you start thinking about this information well before you've ever selected a technology, because you get people thinking about transformation across the organization early on. That allows them to bring some more ideas to the table, get excited, they collaborate, right, encourages buy-in before you've even done anything. Plus, if you've mapped out all your information, then when you talk to your vendor, you can just tell them to give you a prototype. You've already got the information, and they should be able to help you and do a prototype so you can see and visualize that system because the best approach for communicating, again, now we're dealing with people who are not necessarily IT specialists, is to show them the system. So you establish the data set, and then you build that prototype so they can visualize what it is they're going to see. Because when you visualize through prototyping, stakeholders see the system, and it's built around their data, and then they can continue to contribute. They can see how it looks. They can say, gosh, it does this really well, but it needs to do this as well. They can bring other people in because you've got something that you can show them that's tangible that they know they're going to work with every day. They understand it. The process then begins to expand because they'll tell you, oh, from this screen then, this is the next thing we need to do. We forgot to tell you about that before. So process modeling becomes very organic. So it is itself a very agile process. And as I talked about before, in this scenario, workflow modeling is very easy. You don't have to have people who are specialists in it. You do kind of have to take that sort of UML approach where you have one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many relationships. But if you approach it from a data point way, you can do that. It's very simple. Oh, from this state, I go to these 3 states. From that state, I go to those 4 states, et cetera. So you break it down, and it becomes easy for normal people to contribute to the process, become involved in the process. That, in turn, then helps accelerate outcomes and drive adoption. Visualization overcomes barriers. Your stakeholders feel very included because they are included. They're seeing things happen before their eyes. They're experiencing Agile. They feel like they're part of the IT team. They certainly don't get it hung up in the as-is state, which is a big deal, particularly for waterfall, right? Because they understand that it's going to change because they see you change it. Therefore, they're comfortable to move forward. They're comfortable to deploy at minimum viable. They're comfortable because they know that this system can change tomorrow or the next day or the next month or next year. And so overall, it accelerates prototyping. It accelerates agility and drives agility. It's understandable to your team members because it emphasizes the stuff they do on a daily basis. But it begins with data, so it is an alternative to the traditional BPM process modeling approach. But I believe that's very good because you involve so many people, they don't need special training, and the ultimate goal for any system is that it have a high level of adoption at the end. And by involving as many people as you can throughout the process, you're going to guarantee a good level of adoption at the end. And that is what is going to define success for the system. Because a beautiful system that's beautifully architected that people don't buy into is not a system that's going to work for you long term. At the University of British Columbia, it was transformative. This team that had never before experienced Agile actually became Agile. UBC, through this process, developed their first system, the system of record, the resident management system, and then they expanded from there. It streamlined data across their entire organization. It really set the standard, not just for the medical school, but for the larger university as a whole, and allowed them to free up a lot of internal resources, which is what we always want to do with any sort of digital initiative where we're moving processes and we're trying to refine what we do. That is truly process improvement. So, in summary, really about data-first approach, the goal is to accelerate the prototyping process. That, in turn, improves overall agility, which in turn drives user engagement and system adoption. Okay. Here at MicroPact, we do that on the IntelliTrack platform. It's an enterprise-level platform, as I said, data-first approach to continuously configurable case management and BPM solutions. Because it is a continuously configurable platform, you can continue to adjust it in the future. IntelliTrack is built on open standards, it's open architecture, and it's platform independent with integrated mobile document management and analytics. And as I mentioned way up front in the presentation, we started in federal government. Today we serve 97% of all agencies, a 97% customer retention rate, and 80% of our customers have 2 or more deployments. So it's a good product, and I would encourage you to think about the information that you want to see in a system and contact me for a free prototype. Let us have a talk, and if it makes sense to build out a prototype, we can do that for you. So I really want to thank you for your time today, and I believe Vance probably has some questions for me.
Bob, great session. We love the case studies and the business results. Really, really great session. And you're right, we do have some questions. With your permission, let's go to questions because they're both high-level case study types as well as a little bit on the technology.
Sounds good.
You know, you spent quite a lot of time, Bob, talking about that university example. So let's drill into that a bit because it really did highlight the philosophy as well as execution of what you guys are doing there at MicroPact. So the first question comes in, can you explain a bit more about how MicroPact's view of a data-first approach changes how we should design and build a case management? Can you explain how MicroPact helps me define states and milestones as data points?
Sure. Well, when you start a case, you would attach a stub process to it. So you define a data object, and then you say this data object is going to have a stub process, right? And so that stub process always has a begin state, an interim state, and an end state. And so then you go on from there. Once you've modeled out your data object and your data elements, and maybe you've got a child object and some child elements, then you begin going further into the model, and you say, like, okay, well, what are the states along with this? And that's a question you really ask yourself as you're modeling the data. You say, like, okay, I'm on this form. What is the next thing that I want to happen after this form? And that then will create your next either event or your next state.
Oh, excellent, excellent. You know, here's another question that talks about how to go from idea to deliverable. And the question here says, it sounds like MicroPact is doing a lot to help us configure and not have to hand code a case management or workflow BPM project. Can the speaker give us some hands-on details of how a customer actually delivers an application for testing?
Oh, that's a great question. I love this question. My CTO likes to talk about what's called Dietzler's Law. And Dietzler's Law talks about how you can go to an extent with configuration where you get to a point where you obfuscate all the underlying data and you actually make it very hard for coders. We've taken IntelliTrack to a point where we've tried to make it very easy for coders. And so it is a very lean platform in many ways. And if you want to get in and do code, it's really easy to do. You know, we don't obfuscate the data tables. We make it all very available. It's all open standards, and it's Java, right? So you can get right in there and write Java in there. However, 80% of the application configuration can be done by a business analyst. I keep beehives, and I'm a marketing guy, but I've built my own apiary manager to manage my hive yards, my hives, to track my bees, et cetera. And if the marketing guy can build a system for himself, it's not that hard. You go in, you build a data model, there's validation, it takes you right through the process, and then when you want to do code, it's nice and easy to get in there to do the code, because particularly when you're building big enterprise systems, you're going to want to get in there and build those integration points. And if you have to do all of that through configuration, you begin getting to a point where you're turning yourself inside out, configure it, which then generates Java, which then gives you your integration point. And that can actually be a much harder exercise. So we've decided not to go down that path.
Very good, and I know we got some other technical details among the downloads that you brought with us this morning, Bob, but just to kind of circle back to that use case that you shared, where you had that great picture of 7 or 8, 9 people, and only one guy was an IT guy. Is that typical? And if so, how long did it take to get to the point that these folks all felt like they had a good, at least first-generation application?
Average deployment for, sort of an average system, most of them are around 3 months.
Oh, that's great. Here's a question because, of course, we're Integration Developer News, Bob, so we have case management as well as actual architect integration folks. Speaking of data first, do I need any special data prep or data integration to work with MicroPact?
No, not at all. In fact, when we work with people to prototype systems for them, because that's a normal part of our process, it's tough to understand unless you can visualize it. It's our normal process to prototype systems for people. We usually have an hour discussion info gathering call and then say, look, just send us whatever stuff you can, whatever Excel, spreadsheets, Access, sort of database forms, reports to us, and we'll architect a prototype around that, and you'll get a good sense of where we're going, and then we can continue the discussion and continue prototyping from there. And the nice thing is then the prototype acts as a jumping off point if we're going to actually build the final system.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Another quick start question kind of comes in here, Bob. Does MicroPact offer any templates or pre-configured apps that we can use either out of the box or fine-tune for the business?
Absolutely. That's a great question. We actually have 20 pre-configured applications. We started out, as I mentioned early on, in equal opportunity employment, so many of those are centered around EEO, civil rights, alternative dispute resolution, and then they kind of go out in concentric circles from there. From there, you start getting into claims management, complaint management, background investigations. So there's a lot of non-core HR functions there. There's a lot of investigative pre-configurations, and all those pre-configurations are, I would say, 80% solutions, and then you can configure them to your organizational hierarchy. You add your terminology, your integration points, and then, of course, whatever other modules and functionality you want on top of that.
Just a moderator observation here, Bob. It was such a great question and a great answer. Just connecting the dots in my own mind as you were answering it, it sounds like this idea of the template, it complements the data first approach that you've done, that for the customer, once they get past one or two of their own data first projects, they can actually leverage that, and doing the third, fourth, fifth becomes a lot quicker.
It's absolutely our hope that everyone will build with the platform. As I said, the code bit is Java. Right, it's Java and JavaScript. Our goal is that all of our customers build their own applications. You know, when you model out an application, that entire configuration is saved as an XML file, right? And so I can take that XML file from my dev environment and either point my test environment to it or just move the XML across by downloading it, uploading it again. And immediately, that next environment is configured exactly like the one I was on. It doesn't bring across the underlying data in terms of the case data, but at the configuration of the application. And then that's how you then move it into production. So yeah, our pre-configuration is literally, it's uploading that XML file and the system is suddenly configured as a background investigation system or whatever.
Wow, that is well done. You know, Bob, just talking about general architecture, can you give us a sense, is MicroPact available totally on-premise? Is there a cloud approach? Give us a sense of your commitment to the cloud for this approach.
So it is architected for the cloud. I would say that 70% of our customers are actually on-prem and 30% are in the MicroPact data hosting centers. And the nice thing is, of course, you could establish it in our cloud, and then if you want it to be on-prem, again, all you're doing is you're moving that XML file across, you're standing up a system on your side, and it's the exact same thing. So it's nice because, as opposed to other vendors, you get a different cloud offering from the on-prem, it's the same.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And of course, what follows from that, those folks that do have an offering in the cloud, it usually makes it a lot easier to engage with customers, let them kick the tires or take a test drive. How would folks work with you to take a test drive of MicroPact and IntelliTrack?
Yeah, again, the best way to do it is let's talk about what you want to capture and what you want to see. Let's build you a prototype so it's your system, so you can see your data and how it would function. That's the best first step.
Bob, this has been a great session. I see we're out of time, but thanks again for a really great look at MicroPact and IntelliTrack, your new approach to a data-first way to think about case management, as well as this great use case example. I think it puts some real context into what is really a great revolution here in BPM, and glad to have MicroPact part of BPM-CON.
Well, Vance, I have to say thank you so very much. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your reaching out to us and letting us do this and share our ideas with everybody else. So thank you.
Terrific. And as we love to do here at BPM-CON, Bob mentioned some other great resources. A reminder again, we've got some that are downloadable for you right now, but there are some others we couldn't get into the PDF format that are on Bob's site there at MicroPact that are going to be worth your paying attention to. So those are up there for you in this slide, which will be live linked when you download the PDF. Thanks again, everyone.